as we were talking in our parenting class, consequences for doing something you shouldn't have done. And so God is not taking away what's going on, but He is giving them, or has given them, an opportunity to get things worked out. So when you're bit, I want you to look at this. Now, that again is the strangest thing. I mean, what does turning around and... It's like if you'll turn around and look at the clock just often enough, the preacher will quit preaching. I don't see anybody turning around. Good. All right then. But I mean, there's nothing magical in that. But there was in what God was saying. A ridiculous thing as it is, God says, this is what's going to save you. I don't think any of them complained when they got bit. Oh, I'm not going to look. I'm not going to do that because I think that's dumb. Nobody wanted to die. When God gives us a command, no matter how ridiculous it seems to sound, let's just do it. A lot of things that He'll tell us may not make sense. Some of them do. Some of them have to do with our health and relationships, and they just make perfect common sense. And other things, you scratch your head and wonder, what does that have to do? It has to do with whether you believe God, trust Him or not. Just do it. Well, they did. But here now, as we're relating this is what Jesus is talking about back in John, or over now in John chapter 3. That just as Moses was lifting up the serpent in the desert, so the Son of Man will be lifted up. He becomes our salvation. Sin is not taken away. Satan's not cast out. He's still there. But we have a way out. And this is what Jesus is talking about in John chapter 3. Same concept here. These three things come when Jesus is lifted up. Number one, He draws all people to Him. Number two, we have an out for our sin. And we have someone to look to that allows us to get away from Satan. Although He's never taken away, we have an opportunity to get back to Jesus. Now, as you think about all these things, I want you to look at 2 points here as we kind of wrap up all of this stuff. It's not rambling, but it has to deal with this idea of when I'm lifted up. Number one, there is still, I believe, a way in a sense of lifting up Jesus in our lives. Now, I don't mean that all these little trivial things along the way, but if we will exemplify that Jesus Christ that was crucified, and we will stand with Him the way He stood with the people there, that'll make a difference in somebody's life. That Jesus will be glorified, and people will still be gathered to Him and will look to Him. If I'm willing to sacrifice, if I'm willing to do what Jesus says, that it will make a difference in the lives of people. If I will lift up the Jesus that was willing to humble Himself on the cross, and I become the person behind the cross, that nothing counts in my life, it's all about Jesus, that will make a difference. We lift Him up. We give Him the position He should have. It's a position on the cross, but it's a high position that He gladly took for our sins. Number two, unless a grain of wheat dies, going back to that John 12 passage that led up to this. And I think it has to do with us too. Jesus was talking very specifically about Himself. Unless a grain of wheat dies and is fallen to the earth and grows, and it can't produce any grain. I think it has to do with our lives too. For much of what Paul talks about, for me to live as Christ and die is gain. Talking about in this life. But it's no longer I that live, as he says. It's Christ that lives in me. What a difference we can make as Christians if we can take the attitude of Jesus. Number one, lifting Him up. And number two, we die. Kind of like what John the Baptist talked about. You remember back in Matthew chapter 3, when they came to Him and they were talking to Him, and John is preaching these fabulous lessons, and among that, a little bit Matthew quotes in there. They're asking about Jesus, and they go, no, I'm not the Messiah. I'm not worthy to even think about it. I'm not worthy to tie His sandals or His shoelaces, or however you want to paraphrase that. How good it would be when we can lift up Jesus and recognize, number two, that He has first place in life. That we die and everything belongs to Him. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 about this idea of death. And it talks about that Jesus then comes into being or connected with us because of our death. That there's where the difference is made. So we die for Christ, we lift him up, and we exalt him. Three things that Jesus did by being lifted up. He brought all people to him. He died for them that more grain would be produced. And above all, there's an opportunity then for the people to be saved on the cross, lifting them up. We do that still as Christians with the things that we do, and exemplifying Jesus in every way in our lives. This is a great place to be. So much going on, so much love shared, so much focus on Jesus. Just keep it up. It makes a difference. People don't always talk about it, but it makes a difference. So stay with it. God bless you in those efforts. And as we close the lesson tonight, if there's somebody that's not right with God, if you've never been baptized into Christ, you got a question about whether you've done that right to start with. We're either here to help you do that now or to talk with you about it from the Scriptures. And God's will be done. If you need some kind of change or some kind of help or a prayer, we're here to help you with that. If you'd like to come forward, we're singing a song to encourage you to do that. While we stand and sing, please come. God.